Take away the supernatural, and what remains is the unnatural.
I am the first immoralist. One day, my name will be associated with the memory of something tremendous. A crisis without equal on earth, the most profound collision of conscience, a decision that was conjured up against everything that had been believed, demanded, hallowed so far. I am no man. I am dynamite. My truth is terrible, for no one so far has called lies truth. I was the first to discover truth. The concept of sin was invented as a form of torture. The concept of free will was invented to confuse the instincts. The concept of good was invented to make man side with what is weak, with failure, with suffering of itself. All these things deserve to perish. I must confront humanity with the most tremendous task that has ever been demanded of it. Religion is for the rabble. Only the few who understand me understand that only we are the premature births of an unproven future. We are new, nameless, self-evident, stronger, more audacious. We are the supreme achievement beyond mere modern man, beyond mere good and evil. We have annihilated morality. We are the overman, the superman. God is dead, and we have killed him.
God is dead, beyond good and evil. These catchy phrases have been swallowed whole by the so-called intellectuals ever since they were first uttered by Friedrich Nietzsche, the madman who unfortunately turned out to be the most influential philosopher in the modern world. But Nietzsche himself swallowed another philosophy whole which gave him most of his ideas, the idea that only the strongest survive, that the weak are expendable, the idea of endless progress, the notion that humanity has not only progressed to this point, but now must progress beyond it. These are precepts that Nietzsche took from Darwinism. Nietzsche believed that humans are evolving into a higher life form that will be beyond human. He claimed that we have already progressed beyond humanity as it once was, which was religious. We no longer need religion. God is dead. God is extinct. One of God's functions was to provide moral unity. Therefore, morality is also extinct. We have moved beyond good and evil. Multitudes of philosophy professors and their students were seduced by these ideas. None of them were able to dissect Nietzsche the way their counterparts in the other departments managed to dissect everything human. No one figured out Nietzsche's fundamental flaws. Well, one person did, G.K. Chesterton.
Nietzsche, with his stark imagination of radiant monsters taking the place of men, thinks he is rebelling against Christian tradition. But he really doesn't even know what it is that he is rebelling against. He is actually rebelling against man. Or rather, his philosophy is rooted in a despair about man. He has consoled himself with a vague enthusiasm about the Superman. But what is really meant by this expectation of a superior organism? It means that the actual animal called man is to be treated almost as an extinct animal. He is a fossil walking the streets, a sort of appendix of the cosmos, a superfluous organ. Man has survived evolution only to prove that he has no survival value. He is a cosmic disease, a sort of astral appendicitis. He must be improved upon, simplified, to make way for a new and nameless superhuman being. But what does this simplified Superman look like? Certainly a man is not a complete man without a nose. But for anything anybody knows about Superman, they may be better off without noses. Noses may be nests for germs, or the noise of the blowing of noses may disturb the delicate nervous organism of that strong man of the future, who is to be the master of us all. The modern philosopher is not trying to get rid of the troubles of men. He is trying to get rid of men because they are the troubles of the philosopher.
One of the most overlooked points about Nietzsche that Chesterton does not overlook is the fact that Nietzsche was an aristocrat. It explains in part why he despised the common man. Aristocracy is not a system, it's an accident. It's what happens when a small group of people have too much money, which prevents them from doing honest work. Chesterton says that aristocracy is a rebellion of the rich against the poor. This elite group of people have the mistaken notion that their money and their power also automatically includes good ideas. Nietzsche admired the strong and despised the weak. But ironically, he was not the sort of man that he praised. He was a weak man. He was, says Chesterton, a frail, fastidious, and entirely useless anarchist. His whole work is shot through with the pangs and fevers of his physical life. And yet he had a curious hatred of the weak, which extended to all humanity. He said, we need the overman, the superman.
Man is a thing that must be surpassed.
In one sense, the remark is most Christian and orthodox. But unless you have a permanent standard of good, how do you know when he has been surpassed?
I am going to do what has never been done before. I am going to contradict as no one has ever contradicted before. I am going to invert all values. I am going to free everyone from the straitjacket of morality.
The love of the untried is truly the love of nothing.
Nihilism is standing at the door. The triumph of nihilism is inevitable. The highest values have lost their value. Morals have lost their purpose. The past must be broken up.
Nihilists, as their name implies, have nothing to revolt about.
In all ages, the wisest have always agreed in their judgment of life. It is no good.
Every high civilization decays by forgetting obvious things. Our generation, in a dirty, pessimistic period, has blasphemously underrated the beauty of life and cravenly overrated its dangers.
Your life is intolerable without immortality. But why should not your life be intolerable? You say a good cause justifies any war. I say a good war justifies any cause. One must have chaos within, that one may give birth to a dancing star.
Nietzsche had a wonderful poetic wit and is one of the best rhetoricians of the modern world. He had a remarkable power of saying things that master the reason for a moment by their gigantic unreasonableness.
Nietzsche's language is striking and seductive, but his tone is always scornful. He treated mankind with endless scorn, with superior sarcasm. He could sneer, but he could not laugh. And his followers are much the same. Chesterton observes, no one has ever met a jolly Nietzscheite. It is strange that Nietzsche preached a gospel of hardness. Why is that strange? because Chesterton says to preach anything is to give it away. It's an act of altruism. Why should Nietzsche care that we should learn that the strong will prevail over the weak? It's all inevitable. Why should he care that there must be an inversion of values and that we should know about it? It's going to happen anyway. Why does it matter if it happens sooner rather than later? It's all part of the natural process. What's the advantage of knowing? Maybe it bothered Nietzsche that he wasn't getting his message across. Maybe it bothered him that it didn't matter one way or the other. Maybe it bothered him that God was dead. Something bothered him, because he went mad. He spent the last 11 years of his life in an insane asylum. He died in 1900, the year that G.K. Chesterton began his career as a writer. Some say that Nietzsche went mad as a result of getting syphilis. Maybe, but what they leave out of that story is how he got syphilis. He purposely infected himself. He intentionally visited a prostitute that he knew had the disease. Now, visiting a prostitute already demonstrates a certain loss of clear thinking, but deliberately visiting a prostitute with the scheme that Nietzsche had in mind is not the act of a sane man.
Nietzsche attempted to act out his principles with a strange and pitiful audacity. He embraced immorality like an austere and difficult faith. He urged himself to lust and cruelty with the same tremulous enthusiasm with which a Christian urges himself to purity and patience. He struggled as a monk struggles with bestial visions and temptations, but he was fighting against the ancient necessities of honor and justice and compassion.
Some say that Nietzsche's mental break actually came when he saw a man in the street beating a horse mercilessly. That may be true, but if it is true, it also proves that Nietzsche did not believe his own philosophy. Why the sudden compassion for a horse? Where was the hardness that he had preached? But Chesterton has another explanation for Nietzsche's madness. It was his very philosophy that drove him insane, because anyone who follows such a philosophy to its logical conclusions would end up where Nietzsche ended up, in a madhouse. Chesterton says the poet simply tries to get his head into the heavens, the logician tries to get the heavens into his head, and it's his head that splits. Chesterton defines madness as using mental activity so as to reach mental helplessness. That's what Nietzsche finally achieved, mental helplessness. Chesterton says that the whole problem with Nietzsche is that his is an unnatural philosophy. That is, any normal person would recognize it as unnatural.
Suppose 4 educated men in a bus were listening to a lecture from some new German philosopher, some philosopher who talked about the Superman or the master morality. One of the educated men in the bus might say that the philosopher was wicked, which might be only partly true. Another would say that he was illogical, which might be irrelevant. Another that he was exaggerative. Another that he was unpractical. But the bus driver, with deeper wisdom, would simply say that the German gentleman was mad. And this is, of course, the ultimate psychological truth about him. That he might have something to say, that he might even be valuable, but that he did not see life steadily or see it whole. That he set virtue to fight virtue in a vain battle, that he was not in the center, that he had lost that balance of many opposite merits, which is the whole meaning of the thing called man. The first word that the first bus driver would say about Nietzsche would be the last word that the last philosopher could say about him. He is not universal. Or, to put it in the quite admirable popular phrase, he is not all there.
Nietzsche's ideas would have been condemned in any normal age, but they probably would have been simply dismissed before they even had a chance to be condemned. They simply would not have been taken seriously by any normal person, like the bus driver in Chesterton's illustration. Chesterton says that almost all German philosophy goes against common sense. Each of the German philosophers pretended to have a thought that nobody ever had, and they attempted to build a system on that supposedly unique thought, whether it was the system of Kant or the system of Hegel or the system of Schopenhauer or Nietzsche or Marx or all the rest. But none of these supposedly unique thoughts, including the thought of Nietzsche, was a new idea.
Nietzsche, as everyone knows, preached a doctrine which he and his followers regard apparently as very revolutionary. He held that ordinary altruistic morality had been the invention of a slave class to prevent the emergence of superior types to fight and to rule them. Now, modern people, whether they agree with this or not, always talk of it as a new and unheard of idea. It is calmly and persistently supposed that the great writers of the past, say Shakespeare for instance, did not hold this view because they had never imagined it, because it had never come into their heads. Turn to the last act of Shakespeare's Richard III, and you will find not only all that Nietzsche had to say put into 2 lines, but you will find it put in the very words of Nietzsche.
Conscience is but a word that cowards use, devised to keep the strong in awe.
You see, Shakespeare had thought of Nietzsche and the master morality, but he weighed it at its proper value and put it in its proper place. Its proper place is the mouth of a half-insane hunchback on the eve of defeat. This rage against the weak is only possible in a man morbidly brave, but fundamentally sick, a man like Richard III, a man like Nietzsche. This case alone ought to destroy the absurd fancy that these modern philosophers are modern in the sense that the great men of the past did not think of them. They did think of them, only they did not think very much of them. It was not that Shakespeare did not see the Nietzsche idea. He saw it, and then he saw through it.
In spite of the madness of Nietzsche, in spite of the madness of his philosophy, many leading intellectuals of the 20th century actually took his ideas seriously. For instance, Nietzsche was an outspoken advocate at the forefront of eugenics. He said that undesirables should be sterilized, that marriage should take place only under medical supervision, that in his own words, many people must be sacrificed in order to save mankind. But people like George Bernard Shaw embraced this very philosophy. So did Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, who proclaimed on the cover of her journal, the Birth Control Review, "More children for the fit, less for the unfit." G.K. Chesterton saw all the dangers of this philosophy and predicted that birth control would lead to abortion and infanticide and also euthanasia. He said prophetically that we would begin to murder people whom we considered to be a nuisance to themselves, but in one short step, murder people who were a nuisance to us. He watched and warned against the fact that an entire nation had embraced Nietzscheism. That nation, not surprisingly, was the same place that gave birth to all the mad German philosophies, Germany. Chesterton seemed to be the only one who realized what was going on.
The things the Germans say, the things we hear, the things they mean us to hear, their own version of their own acts, contain an extraordinary emphasis upon brutality, not as a charge to be repelled, but as an excellence to be exalted. It may be that the German masses admire the quality. It is certain that the Nazi leaders admire themselves for possessing the quality. Nietzsche's notion of an inversion of values has really struck, and one thing is certain: we shall know what war and division really mean, and in a way that we have never known it for ages.
Chesterton said the world was moving toward a new war, and that it would be the worst and most horrible war in history, and it would begin on the Polish border. He died in 1936. His prediction came to pass just a few years after his death. Nietzsche's own prediction about himself, unfortunately, was also right. He managed to create a crisis without equal on Earth. For in addition to the bloody war that nearly destroyed Europe, the Nazis, in the full fever of a philosophy formed by the Nietzschean transvaluation of values, systematically murdered 6 million Jews and 5 million Polish Catholics. In spite of the fact that Chesterton was right about the war, right about Nietzsche's connection to Nazi Germany, right about the horrible outcome, the intellectual community missed it completely. Chesterton was forgotten. What happened less than 2 decades after the end of World War II, after the discovery of the concentration camps and the gas chambers? What happened? What happened after Nietzsche's horrible ideas were played out? His ideas were more popular than ever. Millions of students were being taught the philosophy of Nietzsche on the campuses of American universities. A new group of intellectuals were teaching the inversion of values, and all of them quoting Nietzsche, saying with great relish, "God is dead." They were preaching that traditional morality must be rejected or transcended, parroting Nietzsche's phrase that we must move beyond good and evil. The next 2 generations were taught the madness of Nietzsche, but they were prevented from ever hearing about the common sense of G.K. Chesterton. They never knew that G.K. Chesterton had answered all of the insane arguments of Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche offers to lift us yet further above the beasts by abolishing the only thing that at present lifts us at all above the beasts, the sense of sin.
Nietzsche wanted to deny God because he wanted to deny sin. And even today, no one wants to talk about God because no one wants to talk about sin, which is the whole reason for our separation from God. Nietzsche thought himself very bold by trying to turn Christian civilization on its head. He boasted that he had done things with the language that no one else had ever done. When he wasn't announcing the death of God, he was proclaiming that God was a devil.
It was God himself who, at the end of his day's work, lay down as a serpent under the tree of knowledge. Thus, he recuperated from being God. The devil is merely the leisure of God on that 7th day.
But G.K. Chesterton used imagery that matched Nietzsche's audacity in ways that Nietzsche could never have imagined.
Christianity is the only religion on earth that has felt that omnipotence made God incomplete. Christianity alone has felt that God, in order to be wholly God, must have been a rebel as well as a king. Alone of all creeds, Christianity has added courage to the virtues of the Creator. For the only courage worth calling courage must necessarily mean that the soul passes a breaking point, and yet does not break. In this, indeed, I approach a matter more dark and awful than it is easy to discuss, and I apologize in advance if any of my phrases fall wrong or seem irreverent, touching a matter which the greatest saints and thinkers have justly feared to approach. But in that terrific tale of the Passion, there is a distinct emotional suggestion that the author of all things, in some unthinkable way, went not only through agony, but through doubt, In the Garden of Eden, Satan tempted man, but in the Garden of Gethsemane, God tempted God. It passed in some superhuman manner through our human horror of pessimism. When the world shook and the sun was wiped out of heaven, it was at the cry from the cross, the cry which confessed that God was forsaken of God. And now let the revolutionists choose a creed from all the creeds, and a God from all the gods of the world. They will not find another God who has himself been in revolt. Nay, the matter grows too difficult for human speech. But let the atheists themselves choose a God. They will find only one divinity who ever uttered their isolation, only one religion in which God seemed for an instant to be an atheist.
Nietzsche, for all his originality and poetic blasphemy, could not even come close to the boldness and beauty of Chesterton, who picks up the gauntlet thrown down by the German philosophers and casts it back in their faces, turning their own words inside out. Let the atheists choose a God. They will find no religion other than Christianity that sympathizes with their own doubts. They'll find no religion other than Christianity that turns everything upside down, where God himself is a rebel. Chesterton says, if there were no God, there would be no atheists. But the atheists every now and then have their day. They announce that God is dead, even though Christianity announced it long before them, even though it is a Christian doctrine that God himself died for us. And as Chesterton points out, since that time, it seems that Christianity has died several times throughout history. It's been defeated, destroyed, demolished, and yet it returns, because it has a God who knew his way out of the grave. I'm Dale Ahlquist. Please join us again for the Apostle of Common Sense, and please support the American Chesterton Society and help us make common sense more common.